Ladies and gentlemen, there is a story of a man who ignored every sign of disaster. When the storm came, he laughed at the warnings. When the flood rose, he refused the boat. When the water reached his neck, he waved off the rescue team, convinced that salvation would come in his own way, in his own time. He drowned. And at heaven's gate, he cried out, "God, why did you not save me?" God's warnings do not come as thunderclaps or grand spectacles designed to terrify. They come softly, persistently, in the places we least expect and often choose to ignore. When we think of divine warnings, we imagine fire from the sky or supernatural signs so unmistakable that no one could possibly doubt them. But God does not often warn that way. Instead, he speaks in the still, small voice that stirs within our conscience. His warnings arrive in moments of unease, in the discomfort that tells us something is wrong, in the aching realization that we are off course. These warnings are not intrusive. They do not force themselves upon us. They require listening, they require attention, and, most of all, they require humility. The humility to accept that we are not as self-sufficient as we like to believe. The great illusion of humanity is control. We build, we plan, we calculate, believing that our intellect and ambition can bend the world to our will. But then something happens. A sickness, an accident, a betrayal, a failure so great that it shakes us to the core. And suddenly, we are confronted with a truth we have spent our lives avoiding. We are not in control. These moments are not mere misfortunes. They are warnings. They remind us that all we cherish, all we strive for, can be taken in an instant. But instead of heeding the warning, we often double down, working harder, running faster, grasping at illusions. We tell ourselves that the problem is external, that if we just fix this one issue, we will be safe again. But safety outside of God is an illusion. The warnings will come over and over until we either listen or face the consequences of our deafness. We live in an age of noise, where distraction is not only available but encouraged. Every moment is filled with entertainment, opinions, and endless information. We drown in voices, some promising success, others demanding our allegiance, all competing for our attention. In the midst of this, the one voice we most need to hear, the voice of God, is often the one we have no time for. His warnings are lost in the clamor of our daily pursuits, and yet they remain. They are in the restless feeling that something is missing. They are in the moments when life suddenly feels hollow, when all the achievements and pleasures we chased leave us unsatisfied. But instead of seeking truth, we reach for more distractions. The world does not want us to hear God, because to hear Him is to be confronted with the reality of our souls. And so we turn up the volume, drowning out the only voice that matters. History is littered with the ruins of those who ignored warnings. Nations, once great, fell because they believed themselves untouchable. Individuals, certain of their wisdom, walked blindly into disaster. Warnings are not given for their own sake. They are given because there are real consequences for refusing to listen. A man who ignores the storm sirens cannot blame the wind for destroying his home, and yet we live as though divine warnings can be dismissed without cost. God is patient, but His patience is not indulgence. He warns because judgment, whether in this life or the next, is inevitable. When we look back at the wreckage of broken lives, failed civilizations, and lost souls, we see the pattern repeated, warnings ignored, destruction followed, and still we believe we will be the exception. There is a moment when warnings cease, not because they were false, but because time has run out. We assume we have tomorrow. We assume that we will recognize the final warning when it comes. But warnings are not invitations to delay. They are calls to act now. The moment of realization, when all the ignored signs finally make sense, often comes too late. We cry out, "If only I had known!" But we did know. The warnings were always there. The question is not whether God has spoken, it is whether we have listened. Humanity has always believed itself to be in control. We build cities, create laws, advance technology, and shape societies with the confidence that we are masters of our own destiny. We measure success by how much we can predict, how much we can manipulate, and how much we can secure against uncertainty. Yet, despite all our efforts, despite the structures we erect to guard against chaos, the world continually reminds us that we are not sovereign. The very foundations upon which we build crumble beneath forces beyond our power. Disasters strike, economies collapse, relationships fracture, and health deteriorates. Every plan, no matter how meticulously crafted, is vulnerable to an unforeseen disruption. And still we tell ourselves that if we just work harder, if we just control more variables, we can regain our grip. But this too is an illusion. The illusion of control is one of the greatest deceptions we embrace, and it is one that we cling to with stubborn determination. We like to believe that with enough intelligence, enough preparation, and enough willpower, we can determine the course of our lives. But reality does not conform to our expectations. A sudden illness, an accident, a betrayal, any of these can shatter the carefully arranged pieces of our existence in an instant. The very breath in our lungs, which we take for granted, is not ours to command. We do not decide the length of our days, nor do we have power over the hearts of others, the turning of history, or the natural forces that shape the world. These moments of helplessness, far from being cruel tricks of fate, are warnings. They are reminders that we are not as self-sufficient as we believe, but instead of heeding them, we often respond with defiance. We seek new ways to reassert dominance over our circumstances, as if ignoring our limitations will make them disappear. Perhaps the greatest irony is that our desire for control often leads to deeper chaos. We manipulate and micromanage, believing that by doing so we can prevent suffering, failure, or loss. Yet the tighter we grip, the more things slip through our fingers. We see this in the way people exhaust themselves in the pursuit of security, hoarding wealth, obsessing over health, or becoming consumed by their reputation, as though these things could shield them from the unpredictability of life. But the more we rely on fragile securities, the more anxiety we feel, because deep down we know they are not truly secure. No amount of money can prevent the inevitable, no amount of power can stop time, and no amount of planning can account for every variable. Still, we strive, still we insist on our own sovereignty, all the while ignoring the quiet but persistent voice that tells us, this is not the way. History is a graveyard of fallen empires, failed leaders, and broken dreams, all built on the illusion of control. Kingdoms rise and fall, civilizations crumble, and what was once thought indestructible is reduced to dust. We look at these ruins with the arrogance of those who believe they have learned from the mistakes of the past, yet we repeat the same patterns. We trust in institutions, in governments, in technology, in ourselves, as though we will be the ones to finally master the forces that have undone all who came before us. But the pattern remains unchanged. Those who believe they are in control are inevitably humbled. This too is a warning. There is a choice before us. We can continue to grasp at the illusion of control, spending our lives in a futile attempt to hold together what is always slipping away. Or we can recognize the warning for what it is, a call to humility, a call to surrender the illusion and seek a foundation that does not crumble. The warning is not given to destroy us, It is given to wake us up before it is too late, but we must be willing to listen. The question is not whether the illusion will be broken. It always is, in the end. The question is whether we will acknowledge the truth before that moment comes. The world is louder than ever. From the moment we wake to the moment we sleep, we are surrounded by noise. Not just the physical clamor of city streets, conversations and technology, but the relentless flood of information, entertainment, and opinions that demand our attention. We scroll through endless feeds, consume headlines in seconds, and move from one distraction to another without pause. We convince ourselves that we are informed, that we are connected, that we are engaged with life, but in reality, we are drowning. And in the depths of this constant noise, something vital is being lost. There was a time when silence was not something to be feared. Reflection was natural, solitude was a gift, and contemplation was not seen as idleness, but as wisdom. But we have traded stillness for stimulation. We do not sit with our thoughts, we escape them. The world has taught us to fear silence, because in silence we are confronted with ourselves. And beyond ourselves, we are confronted with something even greater, the voice of God, calling us back to truth. Yet we have surrounded ourselves with so much distraction that we have made it nearly impossible to hear Him. It is no accident that noise has become the default state of our existence. It is a tool, whether intentional or not, that keeps us from ever asking the deeper questions. The world tells us that productivity is the highest virtue, that busyness is a sign of success, that to be still is to fall behind. And so we run. We run from one task to the next, one form of entertainment to another, convincing ourselves that as long as we are occupied, we are living. But in this endless pursuit, we have lost the ability to listen. We have lost the ability to discern what is true from what is merely loud. The warning signs are everywhere. How often do we feel exhausted, even when we have done nothing of real significance? How often do we feel empty, even though our lives are full of activities, responsibilities, and interactions? The reason is simple. We are feeding ourselves with noise instead of truth. We consume entertainment, but it does not satisfy. We engage in conversations, but they are shallow. We chase success, but when we achieve it, we find it hollow. These are not random experiences. They are warnings. They are signs that we are filling ourselves with things that do not nourish the soul. But instead of paying attention, we do what we have been conditioned to do. We turn up the volume. And yet, the truth does not disappear simply because we drown it out. It remains, waiting to be heard, whispering beneath the chaos. The voice of God does not compete with the noise of the world. He does not shout over our distractions. He speaks in the quiet, in the stillness, in the moments when we are willing to stop and listen. But how often do we give ourselves that chance? How often do we set aside time to truly be alone with our thoughts, to seek wisdom, to allow truth to penetrate beyond the surface? If we are honest, the answer is rarely, if ever, and that too is a warning. There will come a time when the distractions will fail us. The entertainment will no longer amuse, because one thing is certain: the voice of truth will not be silenced. The only question is whether we will allow ourselves to hear it before it is too late. Humanity has always been warned. Warnings come in many forms, through history, through conscience, through circumstances that shake us, through voices that cry out in the wilderness. But just as constant as the warnings is humanity's refusal to listen. There is something in us that believes we are the exception, that the consequences which befell others will not touch us, that we can play with fire and not be burned. And yet, history tells a different story. The past is littered with the ruins of civilizations, the downfall of rulers, and the tragic ends of individuals who ignored the signs until it was too late. It is a strange and tragic pattern. When disaster strikes, when a nation collapses, when a life is shattered, people look back and say, "How did we not see this coming?" But the truth is, the warnings were always there. The cracks in the foundation were visible long before the final collapse. The voices of wisdom had spoken, the signs had appeared, the warnings had been given, but they were dismissed. Why? Because it is easier to believe that the danger is far off, that we have more time, that we are different from those who came before us. It is easier to mock the warning than to change our course. We see this blindness in the stories of history. Empires believed they were invincible, yet they fell. Leaders ignored the warnings of those who saw destruction on the horizon, and they perished. Societies embraced corruption and decadence, believing there would be no reckoning, and they collapsed. This is not coincidence, it is a pattern. It is not fate, it is consequence. The warning always comes before the fall, but the fall comes nonetheless when the warning is ignored. But history does not just speak on the grand scale of nations and civilizations, it speaks to the individual soul as well. How many lives have been ruined because people ignored the warnings within their own hearts? The person who plays with temptation, thinking they will not fall, only to find themselves enslaved by what they once thought they controlled. The one who ignores their conscience, silencing the voice that urges them to turn back, until they wake up one day and realize they have gone too far. The one who hardens their heart to truth, dismissing every sign, until they stand alone in the wreckage of what could have been. The greatest tragedy of ignored warnings is that they are not given to destroy, but to save. A warning is a gift. It is an opportunity to turn back before it is too late. It is a call to wake up, to see reality for what it is, to choose a different path. But when we dismiss warnings, we are not rejecting fear, we are rejecting mercy. We are choosing to walk toward the very destruction we were being called to avoid. There is a moment in every story when the last warning is given. There is a point where the opportunity to turn back is no longer available. And when that moment comes, regret will not undo the choices that led to it. The time to listen is now. The time to change is before the fall, not after. Because when the consequences come, they will come not as a surprise, but as the fulfillment of a truth that was spoken long before. The only question is whether we will listen while there is still time. There is a dangerous assumption that time is on our side. We live as though we will always have tomorrow, as though warnings are merely suggestions that can be entertained at leisure, as though there will always be another opportunity to set things right. But the truth is far more sobering. A warning is not an idle threat. It is a final chance, a lifeline thrown before the waters rise, a call to action before the door is shut forever. And yet we delay. We treat warnings as if they are inconveniences rather than mercies. We silence the voice that urges us to wake up, to change, to turn back, convincing ourselves that we will do it later. But later is a lie. The only time we truly have is now. The great deception is that there will always be more time. We assume that we will recognize the last warning when it comes, that we will be able to repent when it is convenient, that we will change when we feel ready. But warnings do not come on our schedule. They do not wait until we are comfortable, nor do they repeat themselves indefinitely. There comes a point when they stop, not because they were false, but because the time to listen has passed. The closing of a door is not announced with fanfare. It happens in silence, in the moment we realize that the chance we assumed would always be there is gone. History is full of those who waited too long, individuals who ignored the signs until their choices caught up with them. nations that dismissed every warning until they found themselves in ruin. Regret does not rewrite history, it merely confirms what could have been. And yet, we continue in the same pattern, convinced that we will be the exception. We hear the warnings, but we push them aside, not because we do not believe them, but because we do not want to face them. We assume that the warning is for someone else, or that we can answer it later. But later is not promised. Later has led many to destruction. There is a finality to ignored warnings, the moment of realization, when the truth becomes undeniable, often comes too late. When the flood waters rise, the time to build the ark has passed. When the door is shut, pounding on it will not make it open again. The greatest sorrow is not that we were not warned, it is that we were, and we refused to listen. The urgency of now is not a call to panic, but a call to awaken. A warning is a gift, but it is only a gift if it is heeded. The door is still open, for now, but it will not remain so forever. The time to act is not tomorrow, the time is now.